she's terrified. She was terrified. These people, she didn't know. And you know what? They didn't even refer to her as a person. They called her the package. It's that bad. It's disgusting. There's some disgusting, sick pigs who are in our society who are not just the lowlifes we know about.
When Reverend Donna Seraphina uploaded her second reading about the disappearance of 5-year-old Summer Wells, the internet exploded. Within hours, thousands of people were convinced they had finally heard the truth law enforcement refused to say out loud: that Summer wasn't kidnapped. She was sold, drugged, and silenced by the very people meant to protect her. Comments flooded in, believers claiming they felt her spirit, others mapping real-world locations from Donna's visions: a candy-striped house, a carousel, a hollow tree. It stopped being a psychic session. It became a public investigation. But here's the question that still divides everyone who followed this case. Why did so many believe a psychic more than the police? And could that collective belief actually uncover what really happened to Summer Wells? The second reading, by Reverend Donna Seraphina, began like hundreds of others on her channel: a dimly lit room, a steady voice, and a promise to speak only what the spirits allowed. But within minutes, it no longer resembled the typical language of intuition. Donna didn't predict, she asserted. She spoke of specific names, locations, acts, and motives surrounding the disappearance of 5-year-old Summer Wells from Rogersville, Tennessee. By the time she finished, thousands of viewers were convinced they had just heard not a psychic interpretation, but a confession delivered through another voice. In the true crime community, that single video shifted the ground. Donna's first reading months earlier had drawn moderate curiosity. The second one detonated across online forums, TikTok breakdowns, and Reddit threads. Viewers described physical reactions. I felt her energy. I couldn't breathe while listening. I had chills the whole time. The audience didn't experience it as entertainment. They experienced it as revelation. The video's comment section became a collective echo chamber of shock. She's not guessing, she's remembering, one viewer wrote. Another said, when she mentioned the tree stump, I literally saw it too. God was showing us. Dozens compared the experience to her earlier involvement in the Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow case, where details from her readings appeared to match later discoveries in Idaho. That connection alone answered belief. If she had once been right, this must also be true. Metrics reflected that conviction. Within days, the upload reached hundreds of thousands of views. Threads formed solely to analyze every sentence, every pause. People timestamped important parts, treating the video as a deposit of evidence. One user mapped the carousel. Another compared Tennessee's upside-down wonderworks building to Donna's. As above, so below. Description. The psychic's metaphors became coordinates on amateur investigation maps. The emotional gravity of the reading intensified, because it described not random imagery but a storyline, one that placed guilt squarely inside Summer's own home. Donna alleged that her mother, Candace Bly, and father, Don Wells, were both hurt, that the grandmother knew that Summer had been drugged and handed over. The narration was confident, structured, and sounded investigative. For an audience already frustrated by the absence of official updates from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, this sounded like the missing report. This is where the phenomenon turns forensic, the point at which a piece of unverifiable spiritual content transforms into a parallel case file. Each viewer, in commenting, became part of a self-reinforcing mechanism of validation. The repetition of similar emotional phrases, I felt the same chills. I saw what she saw. She's a gift from God, functioned as a peer review process within the belief system. The more people confirmed their shared physical sensations, the more legitimate the reading appeared. Sociologically, this operates like a digital say-ain't scaled to thousands of participants. Instead of a circle of believers around a candle, it's a comment section sensed by emotion. Every affirmation, Amen Donna, God gave you this vision, tightened the circle and erased external doubt. Once the emotional consensus formed, skepticism became a moral offense. Questioning her meant questioning faith itself, or worse, disrespecting Summer's memory. From a forensic communication standpoint, the video gained the attributes of evidentiary authority. It cited Motive L's fear of CPS investigation, identified suspects' family members, detailed method drugging and transferred, and described post-event concealment, burial, or sale. In formal investigations, these are the exact categories an investigator builds. Here, they were supplied by a medium and validated by digital witnesses. The absence of physical proof was replaced by emotional synchronization. To understand why this mattered, it's necessary to contrast it with the official record. By the time Donna's second reading circulated, the TBI had released minimal updates. Searches had been extensive but fruitless. No suspect was named. No cause of disappearance confirmed. That informational vacuum created perfect conditions for alternative narratives to fill the space. Donna's video didn't just tell a story, it filled a silence. The public's readiness to believe her also drew strength from a broader distrust in institutions. Viewers wrote, "Police won't tell us the truth," or "The system protects monsters." To them, Donna represented the moral corrective, a channel uncorrupted by politics or procedure. The combination of spiritual certainty and procedural frustration fused into something powerful, collective conviction. It's crucial to note that this conviction wasn't based on gullibility alone. Many in the comment section were longtime true crime followers, accustomed to studying timelines, reports, and interviews. They knew how to scrutinize inconsistencies. What distinguished Donna's audience was not ignorance but exhaustion. They had spent months chasing leads that ended nowhere. When the reading articulated every suspicion they already held, hurt, neglect, cover up, it offered coherence. The psychic didn't invent their fears, she crystallized them. Psychologically, this fits the model of mass belief propagation. When an unresolved case lacks closure, the community's shared anxiety seeks resolution through narrative, a source that combines authority, spiritual or professional, with vivid detail becomes the closure mechanism. Each repetition, each "yes, I feel it too," functions like evidence multiplication. In the absence of proof, volume becomes validation. The aftermath demonstrated how digital belief can alter the structure of an investigation. Donna's video was reposted, subtitled, dissected, and even used as reference by other YouTube creators presenting case theories. Within weeks, elements from her reading, the red barrel, the candy cane house, the hollow tree, entered the lexicon of the Summer Wells case itself. People spoke of them as if they originated from the police, not from a psychic session. This merging of narrative sources created an epistemic collapse. Audiences could no longer distinguish between factual briefings and spiritual interpretations. Yet, paradoxically, this collapse intensified engagement. Viewers rewatched, timestamped, argued, created maps, and prayed. For them, each replay was another look at the evidence. From an investigative psychology view, what happened here reflects the human need for agency in the face of helplessness. When institutions remain opaque, belief systems reorganize reality to restore control. Donna's reading gave viewers that control. It offered structure, villainy, and consequence, everything an unfinished investigation withholds. By the end of the video, the psychic's words had effectively rewritten the case. The comments show that many accepted her version as final truth. Summer was gone, her death ritualized, and justice delayed. For these thousands, the search had ended, emotionally, if not physically. But an unresolved tension remains, the same one that has fueled the case for years. Why did so many intelligent, vigilant people trust a psychic reading more than a police report? Was it desperation, pattern recognition, or something deeper, a collective intuition that official silence hides more than it reveals? That question lingers at the heart of this investigation. Because to understand what happened to Summer Wells, one must first understand what happened to the people who believe they already know. If the first reaction to Donna Seraphina's reading was disbelief, the second was focus, a narrowing of suspicion that quickly found its target, Candace Bly, the mother of the missing child. Within days, hundreds of comments identified her as the central figure in what they now described as a family conspiracy. Donna's words had drawn the outline, but it was the audience that filled in the color. They didn't see Candace as a grieving mother. They saw her as the origin point of Summer's disappearance, the one person whose silence spoke louder than anything else. In the psychic's narration, Candace was not simply negligent. she was active, calculating, and violent. Donna described her as physically hurt, manipulative, and the leader in getting rid of Summer. The reading went further, implying a deep emotional fracture, jealousy. The alleged motive was primal. Candace envied her daughter because Don, her husband, was obsessed with the little girl. That claim alone reshaped public perception. Suddenly, every video clip, every interview, every glance Candace ever gave on camera was replayed as if it contained hidden guilt. One line from Donna's transcript, "She didn't want a girl," became the chorus repeated throughout the comment sections. Viewers quoted it word for word, treating it as a documented statement rather than a psychic impression. "That explains everything," one user wrote. "She wanted sons because a daughter would take Don's attention." Others took it further. Jealous mothers who were hurt often repeat the cycle. She saw her daughter as competition, not blood. The emotional echo chamber that formed around that idea was almost immediate. The more people wrote it, the more true it became. Soon, the phrase detached entirely from Donna's voice. It circulated as if Candace had publicly said it herself. This is a classic example of narrative contagion, when repetition grants false statements the authority of fact. Then came the action that solidified her condemnation, the block. After Donna reportedly reached out to offer help, Candace blocked her on social media. It was, to most viewers, an unforgivable move. In their minds, no innocent mother would reject assistance in finding her missing child. The logic was emotional but powerful. Refusing help equals hiding something. Comment after comment reinforced it. If my child was missing, I'd welcome anyone who could help. Only someone afraid of the truth would block Donna. That tells me everything I need to know about Candace. This collective reasoning fits what forensic psychology defines as behavioral guilt projection, the human tendency to interpret any deviation from the expected, innocent behavior as proof of wrongdoing. But why did that interpretation take hold so completely? The answer lies in timing. By the moment the block was revealed, viewers already felt emotionally invested in Donna's version of events. To them, Candace's rejection wasn't just rude, it was a direct attack on the narrative they believed was true. The psychic had offered a story that made sense of chaos. Candace had refused to play her part in it. That defiance transformed her from mother to suspect overnight. Beyond behavior, the jealousy motive carried its own psychological weight. Donna's portrayal of Candace's resentment towards Summer fit an archetype that the public recognizes instantly, the hurt parent who repeats her own trauma. In the reading, Donna said Candace had been attacked and hurt her whole life, and therefore, didn't know how to love a child. Viewers echoed that line verbatim, calling it the key to understanding her actions. To them, this wasn't speculation. It was generational pathology. Several comments linked that pattern to their own experiences. "I grew up with a mom like that." "They hate the daughters because they remind them of their pain." "Candace couldn't protect herself as a child, so she punished Summer for being what she couldn't be." These responses show how empathy can transform into conviction. Parallel to that emotional reasoning ran a practical one, fear of CPS. Donna's reading suggested the family knew Child Protective Services was investigating them, and that Summer's disappearance coincided with that impending visit. Many viewers verified that detail independently. Yes, CPS was involved. The leap from "CPS was coming" to "they got rid of her to avoid losing the kids" required only belief, not evidence. The psychic had provided a logical motive that perfectly fit a timeline everyone could verify. At this stage, even attempts by outsiders to moderate the discussion met resistance. A few commenters noted that grief manifests differently, that blocking strangers might simply mean exhaustion. Those remarks were drowned out. The majority saw any defense of Candace as complicity. In investigative terms, what emerged was a new kind of suspect profile built not by detectives, but by collective interpretation. Candace's public behavior, crying inconsistently, speaking nervously in interviews, avoiding eye contact, was parsed like forensic data. One popular thread even dissected her pauses, claiming that every hesitation marked a lie. When Candace blocked the psychic, it was read not as a boundary but as confession through omission. In psychology, this is a phenomenon called guilt substitution. interpreting a neutral act as an emotional leak of guilt simply because it fits a pre-existing expectation. In the true crime community, transparency is virtue. People who open their lives to public scrutiny are rewarded with empathy. Those who refuse are punished with suspicion. By closing her digital door, Candace violated the unwritten contract of openness that governs online investigations. She silenced herself in a space that values perpetual explanation. That silence, ironically, made her louder than anyone else in the narrative. The jealousy angle intensified as viewers rewatched early family footage. In clips where Dawn affectionately addressed Summer, audiences noticed Candace looking away or tightening her jaw. Those micro-expressions, frozen and magnified, became psychological evidence. A single still frame could generate entire discussions. Look at her eyes when Dawn mentioned Summer, pure envy. Even details that once seemed benign, her drinking habits, her friendship circle, her presence at the swimming hole that day, were retrofitted into the theory. The phrase, "she didn't want a girl," evolved into, "she wanted her gone." The audience completed the sentence that Donna had left open. What makes this phenomenon critical to analyze is not whether Candace is innocent or guilty, but how the idea of guilt was built without data. The reading supplied a foundation, the comments constructed the architecture. The block, a trivial social media gesture, became a cornerstone of belief. Once embedded, it resisted removal. Even if the TBI released a statement clearing her, the public narrative would remain intact, because belief operates on emotional closure, not procedural evidence. And so the question deepens. In a digital age where every action leaves a trace, how do we tell the difference between privacy and guilt? When silence becomes the loudest evidence, what chance does truth, any truth, have to be heard? If Candace Bly was painted as the emotional trigger in the public narrative, Don Wells became its gravitational center. The man at the core of everything the audience believed was dark, secret, and unspeakable about the disappearance of his daughter. The comments following Donna Seraphina's second reading turned his name into a shorthand for perversion. To many, Don was not just the father, he was the perpetrator, the buyer, and the beneficiary of the act itself. Donna's words had been precise enough to direct attention. She said Don wanted to be with Summer even after death. She described a man whose obsession with his daughter was not paternal but predatory. Within hours, this single sentence spread through social media like a contagion. It connected seamlessly with what the public already suspected, that Don's behavior toward his daughter had always been off. Old interviews resurfaced, footage from local news, YouTube panels, even his calls to Christian programs, each dissected frame by frame. When Don described Summer as the love of our lives and a beautiful young lady, his tone became the evidence. Viewers slowed down his speech, studied his pauses, his eyes, his hand movements. Comments appeared under every video. That's not how a father talks about his 5-year-old. You can hear the lust behind his words. He's confessing without realizing it. This phenomenon, interpreting tone and phrasing as self-incrimination, is a known cognitive pattern called linguistic inference bias. In the absence of forensic data, language becomes the closest thing to a crime scene. Words are treated like fingerprints. But for the public following the Wells case, this wasn't abstract psychology. It was their only evidence, and they examined it with a precision usually reserved for sworn transcripts. The most quoted line, "She loved me like no other," became a phrase of horror. It appeared in dozens of comment threads and summaries of the case. Viewers extracted it from its context, a grieving father trying to express affection, and redefined it as proof of fixation. The shift from love to lust didn't come from the word itself. It came from the accumulated expectation that Don was guilty. Once that expectation existed, his vocabulary could only confirm it. Donna's reading reinforced this framework. She claimed that Don had fetish for small children, that both he and Candace hurt Summer, and that evidence, specifically photos, would one day be found. She even said, "They'll find photos of Don doing things." That prediction became prophecy in the eyes of the audience. So when Don later told reporters that investigators had taken his camera, a single line buried in an interview became the story's defining artifact. He said the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had confiscated his camera, but hadn't listed it on the property receipt. Most viewers missed the administrative nuance. If the camera wasn't listed, it must contain something they don't want revealed. The idea fit too perfectly with Donna's claim to be coincidence. Comment sections filled with speculation. That's where the photos are. TBI knows. They're just building a case. They basically told on himself. No one outside the investigation knew what, if anything, was on that device. Yet, within days, the missing camera evolved from rumor to digital exhibit. On Reddit, users created threads cataloging every mention of electronics removed from the Wells property. On YouTube, creators designed thumbnails showing a camera lens over Summer's face with captions like, "The evidence hidden in plain sight." The story of that camera became more than an object. It became a metaphor for the entire case, something recorded, erased, and waiting to be revealed. Donna's prophecy that they will find photos gave it spiritual authority, and Dawn's own words gave it procedural weight. Two unrelated sentences, fused together, built a piece of evidence that never actually existed in public record. Dawn's background reinforced that coherence. Before the case, online sleuths had already uncovered allegations from relatives claiming that he had a history of misconduct. None of it had been proven, but once those claims surfaced, they became context for everything he said afterward. When Donna described him as a man with a fetish for small children, she wasn't creating a new idea. She was confirming a rumor that had already saturated the internet. The result was a feedback loop. Rumor became reading, reading became validation, validation became truth. In the eyes of the community, Don was no longer presumed innocent. He was an uncharged offender. The label stuck because it satisfied every narrative requirement, opportunity, motive, and history. The audience built its own criminal profile, and Don fit it perfectly. Even his religious vocabulary fueled suspicion. Don often spoke about God, forgiveness, and repentance. In interviews he said, "Only God knows what happened," and "We all fall short." To believers in Donna's interpretation, those words were not faith, they were confession disguised as scripture. Comments read, "He's admitting guilt through his religion," or "That's how predators talk when they think forgiveness covers everything." The same words that might have conveyed spiritual comfort became linguistic fingerprints of sin. The emotional impact of this recontextualization was massive. Viewers who had lost faith in the official investigation found moral clarity in condemning him. They dissected his voice, his pauses, his posture, his every biblical reference. Entire live streams were dedicated to breaking down Don's language. The conclusion was always the same. His words betrayed him. From a forensic communication lens, this is where linguistic evidence becomes weaponized. In court, words are analyzed for consistency, timeline accuracy, or deception cues. Online, they are analyzed for emotional resonance, whether they feel wrong. When Don called his daughter beautiful, it didn't matter that parents often use that word. It mattered that listeners already imagined him as someone who shouldn't. The missing camera compounded the effect. In one popular comment thread, a user wrote, "Find that camera and you'll find the truth." Another replied, "The reason it's not on the list is because it's not just evidence, it's proof." Proof of what? No one could say exactly, but certainty had replaced inquiry. In this ecosystem, ambiguity is intolerable. Every unknown must be filled with meaning. Don's own efforts to defend himself only deepened the perception of guilt. When he appeared on podcasts or religious panels, he often sounded defensive, erratic, or intoxicated. His tone confirmed every suspicion listeners already held. In a world where communication is performance, Don's inability to project remorse in the right way sealed his public conviction. The irony is that the very tools used to humanize himself, interviews, statements of faith, pleas for understanding, became the instruments of his digital autopsy. Every phrase was evidence, every expression a clue. He was dissected not by police, but by thousands of strangers convinced they already knew the truth. And yet, when stripped of emotion, the factual record remains minimal: a missing child, a frustrated father, a seized camera, and an audience desperate for resolution. Everything else, the obsession, the fetish, the photos, exists in a space between testimony and interpretation. Still, the belief persists. Even today, comments continue to appear under old videos. The camera will surface. Donna was right. He'll slip and confess. The story endures because it satisfies a collective need for moral symmetry. The idea that the father who called his daughter, the love of my life, might have been the one who destroyed her provides the tragedy with its final act. But that conclusion raises a question larger than the man himself. When words and emotions become the evidence, and a community becomes the jury, can any truth, guilty or innocent, ever escape the story they've already written? In the constellation of suspects drawn by public belief, Grandma, known online as Grandis, became the quietest yet most haunting figure. She spoke almost nothing publicly, granted no interviews, and left Tennessee soon after Summer Wells vanished. That silence alone was enough to define her role in the collective story. In the eyes of thousands who followed Reverend Donna Seraphina's reading, silence wasn't innocence. It was orchestration. Donna's depiction of the grandmother was severe. She described her as a seasoned hurt, a woman who knows exactly what's up and nooses a leather strap. The psychic framed her as both witness and initiator, the one who put the idea in Candace's mind that getting rid of Summer was a solution to their problems. Viewers seized on a particular image, Donna's description of a candy cane house, where door frames looked like red and white stripes. To most, this wasn't random imagery, it was a signature. The grandmother's real nickname, Candy or Candy Cane, matched the vision perfectly. A symbolic clue had turned literal. From that connection, the narrative wrote itself. The Candy Cane house wasn't just a vision, it was proof that the psychic had seen the grandmother's world. Each mention of candy, peppermint, or red stripes in local Tennessee decor became an echo of guilt. A viewer commented, "God showed Donna the truth. Candy Cane planned everything." Another said, "It's always the quiet ones. She was the one holding the whip, and she's still holding it." Then came the second catalyst, Grandis's departure. Reports surfaced that she had packed up and left the state shortly after her granddaughter's disappearance. The public reaction was immediate and absolute. She ran because she's guilty. To many, leaving was indistinguishable from fleeing. It didn't matter that grief, harassment, or safety concerns might explain her absence. In the court of public perception, flight equals guilt. This assumption became one of the most enduring beliefs in the case. Threads online tallied every day of her absence as further confirmation. Still no word from Grandma. Turned into, still hiding from justice. One commenter wrote, "If my granddaughter was missing, I'd never leave that hill. She knows." Another added, "The one who leaves is always the one who knows the most." Silence and distance merged into an accusation more potent than any confession. What makes this particularly powerful is how it intersected with a second story. The unsolved disappearance of Rose Bly, Candace's sister and the grandmother's other daughter. Rose vanished in 2009, years before Summer's case. Her car was found, but she was never recovered. When that fact resurfaced, it bound the family's tragedies together into a single mythology. Two missing girls, 2 generations apart, one surviving matriarch who knows everything. To the audience, coincidence was no longer plausible. Donna's references to a generational curse and evil passed down fit perfectly. The grandmother became the bridge between both disappearances, the origin of something hereditary. In comment sections, this idea evolved into a theme of intergenerational guilt. First her daughter goes missing, now her granddaughter. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. Evil runs in that bloodline. Donna saw it before anyone else. This line of reasoning, while emotionally persuasive, reveals a forensic paradox. It demonstrates how absence can be turned into presence. The grandmother's refusal to speak, her decision to leave, even her connection to a past tragedy, all were transformed into activity in the narrative. The less she did, the more she appeared to be doing. Psychologically, this is known as presence through silence, when lack of communication is treated as an act of concealment. In many ways, she was the perfect villain for an audience conditioned by uncertainty. Unlike Dawn, she had no voice to complicate her portrayal. Every blank space in her story could be filled freely. If she had spoken, inconsistencies or emotion might have humanized her. By remaining silent, she became pure symbol, an empty vessel for guilt. Donna's characterization amplified that effect. The psychic described the grandmother as mean, controlling, and criminal in spirit. She claimed the older woman doesn't mind children being hurt, and that, she probably suggested selling Summer. The phrasing was deliberate, probably suggested, doesn't mind. These linguistic hedges blurred the boundary between intuition and accusation. Yet for the audience, they were definitive. Each qualifier vanished in translation. What remained was a statement of fact. As belief hardened, the grandmother's silence grew louder. When Sliths realized she had once camped on the property in a trailer, that trailer became an imagined crime scene. Some speculated that Summer's final moments occurred there, hidden in plain sight. Others claimed the trailer was used for trafficking. Without evidence, these ideas might have dissipated, but they matched Donna's imagery of a man camping nearby and a handoff under supervision. The grandmother's physical proximity to that detail sealed the association. Even those attempting to defend her inadvertently reinforced the myth. When someone suggested she might have left Tennessee for safety, another replied, "Innocent people don't run. They fight for the truth." The binary was complete. To stay is virtue, to leave is guilt. No middle ground existed between grief and complicity. From a forensic communication angle, this dynamic illustrates how narratives assign motive retroactively. Once a person is imagined as the architect, every prior action aligns with that identity. The grandmother's history of strict discipline, her stoic demeanor, even stories about her use of corporal punishment, all were reinterpreted as early indicators of cruelty. Her life became backstory for a crime the audience already believed occurred. The inclusion of the Rose Bly case deepened this psychological architecture. Two disappearances, connected by blood, offered the irresistible symmetry of repetition, a pattern that validates itself. Donna's language of evil repeating itself gave the theory moral texture. To many viewers, it wasn't just coincidence or negligence, it was destiny. The grandmother wasn't running, she was carrying the curse forward. Yet, beneath these layers of assumption lies a void of actual evidence. There are no police documents naming her as a suspect, no statements confirming she was questioned as such, no physical link to Summer's disappearance. What exists instead is the audience's need for an architect, someone older, colder, and believable as the mastermind behind chaos. In the logic of public investigation, she filled that role perfectly. The paradox is haunting. The woman who spoke least became the person most responsible in the story that thousands now accept as truth. Her absence functioned as proof, her quiet as confession. And the more time passed without her returning or explaining herself, the deeper the belief settled that she never could, because she was the one who set it all in motion. In the end, the grandmother's image in collective memory is not defined by what she did, but by what she didn't do. She didn't speak, she didn't stay, and she didn't explain. Those omissions, in the architecture of belief, were enough to build an entire crime around her. So the question remains, when silence becomes the strongest sound in a case, are we hearing the echo of guilt, or the audience's need to fill a void that evidence has yet to answer? Every mystery needs an image to anchor belief. In the case of Summer Wells, that image was not a photo from the police files or a frame from security footage. It was a 10-second TikTok video, recorded weeks before the child vanished. It showed Summer dancing barefoot in the yard, spinning in the sunlight beside a large red barrel painted with the words, "For sale." Her mother, Candace Bly, filmed the clip and uploaded it under the caption, "Country Girl." The moment looked ordinary, almost harmless, a child playing on a summer afternoon. But once the psychic reading reframed the family's world as one of secrecy and exchange, that barrel became the centerpiece of a darker story. Within days of Donna Seraphina's second reading, hundreds of comments began referencing the same scene. Viewers isolated the still frame of the barrel and repeated a single sentence. This wasn't a video, it was an ad. What they meant was clear. They believed the clip was an advertisement for the child herself, a covert signal to potential buyers in a trafficking network. In the logic of the crowd, the red barrel and the "for sale" lettering formed a code, a digital equivalent of a ransom note written in plain sight. Donna's own language seemed to encourage that reading. She had spoken about a pedophile ring and a deal made by Candace, implying that Summer's disappearance was transactional, not accidental. She described a man with a top hat, a carousel, and a steam train, suggesting ritualistic imagery, something theatrical and planned. The TikTok, with its childlike performance and visible marker of sale, fit perfectly into that visual narrative. For viewers already convinced of wrongdoing, symbolism became substance. They noted the deliberate framing, how the camera lingered on the words "for sale" longer than on the child's face. They replayed the background audio, slowed it down, and debated whether the laughter in the clip sounded forced. Each detail added weight to the assumption that this was no accident. As one comment read, "Nothing in their house happens by coincidence. Every object means something." This process, where objects are stripped of innocence and repurposed as coded communication, represents a classic case of semiotic misinterpretation. In forensic communication, symbols acquire meaning through shared cultural context. But when that context fractures, when the audience distrusts the subjects depicted, meaning mutates. A red barrel no longer signals a yard sale, it signals complicity. Several elements amplified this reinterpretation. The color red, associated with both danger and desire, echoed through Donna's descriptions of the red and white stars and the candy cane house. The public stitched these fragments together, forming a single tapestry: red stripes, red barrel, red for sale, a chromatic language of guilt. Even the ordinary phrase, "country girl," came to sound like a marketing tag. Under comment sections, belief hardened. That's how they advertise kids, right in front of us. It's a message to the buyer: the girl in the video is ready. The "for sale" sign was never about a yard item. It was about her. Such certainty thrives where official explanations fail to exist. Investigators never publicly addressed the TikTok's symbolism, perhaps seeing it as irrelevant. The silence left a vacuum that belief rushed to fill. The more the authorities ignored it, the more meaningful it seemed. To believers, omission was confirmation. Cultural precedent strengthened the theory. Online, conspiracy-adjacent movements have long claimed that child traffickers communicate through hidden symbols, triangles, pizza emojis, even product listings. The Wells case imported that lexicon wholesale. The barrel became this story's equivalent of the code. YouTube commentators overlaid screenshots with circles and arrows, pointing out shadows, fence lines, and reflections as if decrypting a cipher. They matched the imagery to Donna's vision of a snuff film ritual, a filmed act of violence meant for sale to others. But viewed through a forensic lens, the leap from image to indictment exposes the fragility of symbolic reasoning. Semiotic contamination occurs when unrelated meanings merge because of emotional proximity. The audience's outrage, justified by empathy for a lost child, fuses with suspicion until symbols cannot be seen as innocent. The red barrel would never again be a storage container. It was now a digital gravestone. Interestingly, some supporters tried to quantify the pattern. A few combed through other posts on Candace's social media, cataloging each appearance of red objects, a shirt, a drink, a sign, and calling them breadcrumbs. They created collages comparing those items to Donna's imagery of red and white stars and candy cane houses. When coincidences accumulate, pattern recognition becomes its own evidence. This kind of crowd analysis mirrors the methods of intelligence work: pattern identification, cross-referencing, motif tracking, but without verification. It transforms emotional intuition into pseudo-forensic proof. The audience believed they were decoding a system, not projecting onto one. From a communication perspective, the red barrel also served a ritual function. It allowed viewers to externalize horror. Instead of confronting the possibility of an unseen, untraceable act of violence, they could point to something tangible. The barrel became the stand-in for the entire mechanism of exploitation. To destroy it symbolically, to expose it, share it, denounce it, was to fight the evil itself. The consequences, however, were real. Online users began visiting Hawkins County, photographing similar barrels around rural properties, posting them under hashtags like Find Summer and For Sale Signal. Innocent homeowners found their decorations suddenly classified as clues. The semiotic contagion had escaped its origin. From the standpoint of truth-seeking, this moment marks a turning point. The TikTok clip, once trivial, transformed into the public's central exhibit. Every subsequent theory about the trade, the handoff, or the ritual radiated from that image. It was the visual anchor of the transaction theory. Yet the contradiction remains. There is no evidence that the video functioned as an advertisement, or that the words on the barrel referenced anything beyond property for sale. The claim exists entirely within perception. But in the collective investigation, perception outruns proof. This raises a deeper forensic question, one that extends beyond the Wells case. At what point does a symbol stop being interpretation and start being accusation? When an image crosses that threshold, it ceases to describe reality and begins to rewrite it. For Summer Wells, that red barrel became the axis around which the story spins. It unified psychic prophecy, public outrage, and cultural fear into one coherent belief. That the child's final moments were not random but sold, displayed in a silent commercial witnessed by millions who didn't understand what they were seeing. Whether that belief reflects truth, or only the public's need to find meaning in horror, one fact remains: a symbol meant to sell junk became, in the eyes of the world, the signature of a crime. In nearly every retelling of the Summer Wells case, one timeline detail repeats like an alarm that no one can turn off. Child Protective Services was preparing to visit the Wells home the same week Summer vanished. To most people, that overlap could be coincidence. To the audience shaped by Donna Seraphina's reading, it was the key to everything. Donna's claim was simple and chilling. They knew they would lose all the kids. She said the parents were aware that CPS had opened a case file and that an inspection was imminent. In her version, the panic of that impending visit became the catalyst for a desperate decision. A decision to make one child disappear, rather than risk losing all four. When that statement echoed through the video's comment section, it hardened into an accepted truth. Hundreds of viewers echoed the same line. That's why they had to get rid of her. In the collective mind of the public, CPS wasn't just a background agency. It was the countdown clock ticking toward exposure. To understand why this theory resonated so powerfully, one has to understand what CPS represents in cases like this. Child Protective Services is the agency tasked with investigating allegations of neglect, hurt, or unsafe living conditions. The process typically involves an initial report, a home visit, and a determination about the child's safety. In rural communities, where privacy runs deep and distrust of government intervention is strong, a CPS visit often feels less like help and more like a threat. The mere prospect of losing children, even temporarily, can trigger panic. In the Wells household, rumors had circulated for months before Summer's disappearance about instability, substance use, and unsafe conditions. According to local interviews, CPS indeed had an open file, but the agency never confirmed what that investigation involved or how far it had progressed. For viewers, that ambiguity didn't weaken the connection, it made it inevitable. If CPS was coming and Summer was gone, the conclusion wrote itself: cause and effect. June 15, 2021, the day Summer was reported missing, became a symbolic pivot. Commenters noted that the alleged CPS check was scheduled for that same week. Whether true or not, the synchronicity between oversight and disappearance felt too perfect to dismiss. On forums and YouTube threads, people spoke of it as an official trigger. One post read, "They knew the inspection was coming, and they couldn't let CPS see the bruises." Another said, "The timing is no accident, it's the cover-up plan." The logic was visceral. Better to lose one child permanently than lose all four through state intervention. Donna's reading articulated that logic directly. She described Don saying, "We can't keep her around, we'll lose all the kids." That single sentence crystallized the community's suspicion. It gave the missing timeline an emotional narrative: fear, desperation, and preemptive damage control. Forensic psychology calls this fear of discovery a cognitive trigger seen in some real criminal cases. It describes the moment when an individual facing imminent exposure, commits a secondary act, sometimes even more severe, to prevent the first crime from being uncovered. In documented examples, parents under investigation have hidden or harmed children to avoid losing custody. That precedent gave Donna's claim a veneer of plausibility. People began citing other cases as precedent. In forums, users mentioned Andrea Pia Yates, who drowned her children during a psychotic episode linked to fear of losing them. Others referenced child deaths that occurred shortly before scheduled CPS visits, using them as validation that the Wells case fit the same pattern. The parallels gave the theory forensic weight, even though no verified documentation linked CPS's visit directly to the day of Summer's disappearance. But in the digital courtroom, factual uncertainty doesn't reduce belief, it amplifies it. Where evidence is missing, logic fills the space. The reasoning was airtight in moral terms. CPS investigates hurt. The Wells family was reportedly under scrutiny. Summer could reveal things that endangered the parents. Therefore, she was silenced before the visit. This sequence functioned like a proof, supported not by data but by intuition. It aligned perfectly with Donna's statement that Candace was selling, or removing, her daughter as a solution to the threat. In this light, Summer's disappearance wasn't random, it was administrative, an act to obstruct a government process. As the narrative spread, some viewers began reconstructing the family's behavior that day minute by minute. They noted how Candace's timeline, errands, phone calls, swimming hole, planting flowers, seemed designed to create an alibi of domestic normalcy. Planting flowers before CPS comes became shorthand for staged innocence. Every action that might have been routine now looked performative. Still, the factual record remains thin. There has never been a public release confirming that CPS was scheduled to visit the Wells property that specific day. The TBI's updates have stayed neutral. The agency acknowledges the family's cooperation, but no evidence of abduction or foul play. In the absence of official closure, the CPS countdown became the most coherent motive the audience could grasp. From a forensic logic perspective, the theory appeals because it satisfies three investigative conditions: fear of losing children, control over Summer, and time before inspection. Each piece fits cleanly into the moral architecture already built by Donna's reading. Yet the same structure exposes its weakness. If the goal was to avoid CPS intervention, removing a child would guarantee deeper investigation, not prevent it. Law enforcement attention multiplies exponentially when a child goes missing. The audience's conviction drew power not from probability, but from empathy inverted. They imagined themselves as parents on the verge of losing everything, and believed that terror could drive anyone to madness. That capacity for fear made the theory feel human, which made it feel true. As with every element of the case, the CPS motive fused empathy with condemnation. It explained the crime through human weakness rather than pure evil, and that made it more believable. One commenter wrote, "She wasn't just jealous, she was desperate. CPS was the final straw." Another responded, "They chose the lesser crime to hide the bigger one." By the end of this discussion cycle, the CPS theory had become an article of faith. Even when skeptics pointed out the lack of confirmation, believers replied, "Of course they won't admit it. That would expose them." The absence of proof became its own proof. So the question remains, one that sits at the center of both logic and belief. Was Summer's disappearance the greater tragedy committed to avoid a smaller one? Or has the countdown clock that the public heard been nothing more than the echo of collective fear, ticking louder each year in the silence that evidence still hasn't filled? Few images in the Summer Wells case have carried the same symbolic and emotional weight as the milk jug photo. It is a single, grainy frame that seems ordinary at first glance. Summer, sitting in the back seat of a truck, resting her head against a carton of milk. Her eyes appear half closed, her body slumped, her skin unusually pale under the filtered daylight. Candace Bly reportedly took the photo while running errands with her mother and another young boy earlier that day. She later used it as proof that Summer was alive shortly before she disappeared. But to thousands of viewers, already primed by Donna Seraphina's reading, the photo told a different story. For them, this wasn't a picture of life, It was a record of sedation, a captured moment of transition. The online consensus formed quickly. Summer looked drugged. Dozens of comments echoed that identical phrase. She's not sleeping, look at her neck angle. Her face is gray, her pupils are off. Some compared the image to post-anesthetic stillness, others called it the moment she left us. What had started as a casual photo became a piece of forensic folklore. The visual detail fed seamlessly into Donna's prophecy. In her reading, the psychic said, "They drugged her to make the transfer easy." When that line reached the audience, the milk jug photo became the perfect visual anchor, a real-world confirmation of an imagined act. To supporters, the drugging theory unfolded like this. Summer was given candy from Grandma, a recurring element in both Donna's narration and in Candace's own recounting of the day. Grandma's candy, a phrase repeated in the reading, became the coded mechanism. Viewers theorized that the candy was laced with something meant to sedate the child, an antihistamine, a painkiller, or, as one popular thread insisted, delta-8 THC, a mild psychoactive compound found in certain hemp products. Delta-8 had recently become accessible in Tennessee, available in vape pens and gummies. Others expanded the theory to include the orange soda seen in the truck that day. In several photos from the same trip, a bright can of orange soda sits beside the children. To most, it's a trivial detail. To believers, it was the delivery medium, a sweet drink masking the taste of something stronger. They pointed out that the soda reappears in multiple images from Candace's social media, calling it a signature. She always gives them soda, that's how she hides it. One commenter wrote. The timeline only reinforced the conviction. The milk jug photo was reportedly taken between 3 and 3:30 p.m. Summer was reported missing around 6:30 p.m., 3 hours apart, just long enough, according to online speculation, for sedation to wear off or transition to transport. Many viewers proposed that the child was incapacitated and handed off. During that window, they constructed elaborate timelines marking when each adult was last seen, who made phone calls, and when cell service dropped. In the audience's reconstruction, every minute between the photograph and the 9/11 call served the same hidden purpose, the transfer. This interpretation, though unsupported by any official investigation, took on the tone of scientific certainty. Threads were titled like autopsy reports, signs of chemical sedation in the milk jug photo. People discussed skin tone, muscle relaxation, and head position. One post compared the angle of her jaw to known indicators of unconsciousness. Amateur analysts even applied photo filters to enhance contrast, claiming it revealed a bluish tinge around her lips, proof of low oxygen. In forensic communication terms, this is a textbook example of photographic evidence perception, the process by which audiences treat images as self-explanatory witnesses. A photograph feels incorruptible, it appears to capture truth directly. But in reality, interpretation defines meaning. Lighting focus and coincidence become pathology when viewed through suspicion. Once the drugging narrative solidified, everything surrounding the image was reinterpreted accordingly. Candace's voice during her retelling of the day, flat, distracted, was described as someone who already knows her daughter is gone. The boy sitting beside Summer in the photo became a control witness, and even the angle of the car seat was said to match Donna's imagery of Summer being laid down after candy. The ordinary had been reclassified as evidence. A particularly telling comment summarized the transformation. They told us what they did, and we didn't listen. That picture is the confession. What's striking about this collective certainty is how it operates without verification. No toxicology results exist. No one outside the investigation has ever seen medical data from that day. Yet the visual impression of fatigue, combined with Donna's narrative, is treated as incontrovertible proof. It is emotional forensics. If it looks wrong, it must be wrong. Psychologically, the image fulfills the human need for closure through sight. In unresolved cases, people crave a final frame, the moment when innocence ends. The milk jug photo offers that moment in still form. It allows the audience to pinpoint an exact second when, in their minds, Summer crossed from safe to doomed. That clarity, however imagined, feels merciful compared to endless uncertainty. From a rational investigative standpoint, the drugging hypothesis collapses under scrutiny. Sedation requires dosage, opportunity, and observable aftermath, none of which have been verified. But belief rarely depends on pharmacology. It depends on pattern. Donna's reading mentioned candy and sedation. Candace's story included candy and soda. The photo showed lethargy. For thousands, that triangulation was irrefutable. Even those who doubted the trafficking elements accepted the idea of accidental overdose. A softer version of the theory suggested that Summer was unintentionally given too much of a sedative or prescription drug, died, and that her family staged a disappearance to avoid arrest. This adaptation kept the same emotional architecture, but replaced intention with panic. Either way, the core remained: the child was drugged. In the end, the milk jug image became more than evidence, it became iconography. It appears in nearly every video, every thumbnail, every headline about the case. It's not just the last known picture, it's the visual shorthand for the entire tragedy. Yet the contradiction endures. No official source has ever confirmed sedation, and no medical examiner has declared the child deceased. The power of that image exists solely in perception. The public sees what they need to see: exhaustion, danger, prophecy fulfilled. So the question lingers like the faint shadow behind the milk jug itself. Did the camera capture a tired child on a hot Tennessee afternoon? Or did it unknowingly record the moment a secret plan was already in motion? In most unsolved cases, the absence of closure keeps people searching. In the case of Summer Wells, the opposite happened. The public created an ending so vivid, so collectively reinforced, that it became more powerful than any official conclusion. For thousands of viewers who followed Reverend Donna Seraphina's readings, the story no longer hinged on whether Summer might still be alive. Donna's words had already delivered a verdict. She said the child was stabbed on a table, her death filmed in what she described as a snuff ritual, carried out by a man in a top hat who enjoyed hurting her. From that moment, the mystery was over, at least for those who believed. Comment sections filled with solemn relief. "She's with Jesus now." One user wrote, "God took her home before they could hurt her again." Others said they felt peace for the first time since the disappearance. The idea that Summer had died, no matter how brutal the imagery, was paradoxically comforting. It ended the unbearable limbo of maybe. In the communal mind, death meant rescue. The scene Donna described was cinematic in its detail: a wooden table, ritualistic surroundings, an act recorded for those who enjoy suffering. The psychic's imagery tapped into cultural fears of child exploitation and satanic symbolism, familiar tropes that provide moral clarity in an otherwise senseless world. She added another layer: the body buried near a tree stump, in soil connected to a building foundation. Those phrases, vague yet tactile, became coordinates in the imagination of the crowd. Within days, the tree stump emerged as one of the most referenced motifs in the case. Commenters spoke of it not only as a physical location, but as a sacred site. The tree protected her spirit, one post read. Another said, "Her soul is still near that stump. That's where they'll find her." The imagery provided geography to grief, a place where loss could be pictured, if not proven. This collective agreement that Summer had died, and that her body rested somewhere in Tennessee soil, became what sociologists call a closure narrative, a self-generated resolution born out of emotional necessity. When institutions fail to deliver truth, communities invent it. The audience, denied evidence, turned belief into autopsy. The psychology behind this is both simple and ancient. Humans cannot endure uncertainty indefinitely. The mind will fill blanks rather than leave them open. When faith replaces fact, the story becomes a vessel for comfort. Donna's reading offered a structure, victim, act, and aftermath that mirrored religious storytelling: innocence violated, death redeemed, evil exposed. To believers, it wasn't just a psychic vision, it was scripture of justice. Dozens of comments echoed this spiritual framing. "She's an angel now," one said. "Her mission on earth is done." Others described seeing Summer in dreams, laughing or holding flowers. In their eyes, the tragedy had transcended crime. It had become prophecy fulfilled. For them, the absence of a body no longer signified mystery, it signified ascension. This transformation from horror to holiness is a defining feature of what forensic psychologists term collective closure fabrication, the process by which large groups construct a conclusion to reduce shared anxiety. It often appears in disasters or disappearances where evidence stalls. The public, unable to bear ambiguity, finalizes the narrative on its own. The Wells case demonstrates this perfectly, an unresolved investigation turned into a finished myth. In this communal myth, every thread led to the same end. The milk jug photo became the before, the stabbing vision became the after, and the tree stump burial became the resting place. The coherence of that sequence made it irresistible. Even people who doubted psychic abilities admitted that Donna's story makes more sense than what the police say. The details might be unverifiable, but they fit emotionally, and emotional fit often outweighs factual consistency. To believers, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's continued classification of the case as missing person wasn't caution, it was cover-up. The reasoning followed a familiar conspiracy logic. If the public already knows the truth, official silence must be deliberate. Some argued that authorities feared exposing a larger network of offenders. Others claimed that evidence had been suppressed to protect local reputations. Each speculation reinforced the core belief that the system was complicit in hiding Summer's true fate. By reframing institutional restraint as corruption, the community reclaimed moral authority. They became both mourners and investigators, the guardians of truth that law enforcement allegedly refused to speak. This inversion of roles gave their conviction a sacred quality. When someone questioned Donna's accuracy, believers replied with near religious fervor, "You can't question what God shows." What emerged was a fusion of faith and forensic imagination. The public performed its own digital burial, lighting candles, posting tributes, even marking approximate GPS coordinates of tree-covered hillsides. These gestures weren't just symbolic mourning, they were acts of possession, taking ownership of the narrative. In their story, they were not spectators but witnesses. The cultural impact was immense. The case of a missing child in a small Tennessee community evolved into an archetype of corruption, sacrifice, and redemption. Videos quoting Donna's description reached millions across multiple platforms. The words, "knife on the table," and "tree stump burial," became part of internet vernacular, shorthand for the case itself. The imagery spread so far that many who encountered it online had never seen the original reading. They learned the case through the mythology it inspired. Yet, beneath this constructed certainty lies the enduring contradiction. There is no forensic confirmation that Summer Wells is deceased. The TBI continues to treat the matter as open, the leads unverified, the investigation ongoing. But in the emotional archive of the public, the case has long since closed. The consequences of such closure are double-edged. On one hand, it offers comfort, a way to grieve collectively and to assign moral order where chaos reigns. On the other, it risks freezing the investigation in fiction, discouraging new evidence from being seen as relevant. When people believe they already know how a story ends, they stop listening for new facts. The Wells case thus stands as an example of how grief and outrage can transform the living search for truth into a finished fable. Donna's vision of a stabbing, the audience's conviction of death, and the ritual of online mourning combined into a cultural event, a mass requiem for a child who, in the official record, is still missing. In the end, what matters less than whether Donna was right is what her followers needed her to be. They needed a voice that could turn fear into finality, uncertainty into revelation, and she provided it. So now the question that hovers over the empty hill in Hawkins County is not, where is Summer Wells? But something quieter, heavier. When everyone already believes the ending, will the truth, if it ever surfaces, even have a place left to be heard? By the time months had passed since the second reading, the Summer Wells case had become something larger than an investigation. It was no longer a missing child story, it was a moral crusade, and its jury was made of believers. For them, Reverend Donna Seraphina wasn't a psychic offering speculation, she was a messenger delivering the truth that authorities had refused to say. Every line she spoke was treated like testimony, every pause like divine emphasis. If police listened to Donna, we'd find Summer. That single sentence appeared in hundreds of variations across YouTube comments, Reddit threads, and Facebook posts. The phrase condensed the sentiment of an entire movement: institutional failure versus spiritual accuracy. When the public lost faith in the system, they replaced it with faith in a person who seemed untouched by bureaucracy. Donna spoke with conviction, the agencies spoke with caution, and conviction always sounds truer than caution. The rallying cry, "Justice for Summer," began as a hashtag but soon transformed into a mantra of grief and defiance. It appeared beneath every video, on candlelit graphics, and in handmade posters shared by users worldwide. The irony is that, in this context, justice no longer meant a court verdict or an arrest. It meant recognition, acknowledgement that Donna's version was real, that the perpetrators named in her reading would be condemned morally, even if they were never convicted legally. This is the anatomy of faith-based conviction, when public emotion replaces the evidentiary process, and the line between belief and proof dissolves. Viewers spoke of truth as if it were an intuitive sense rather than a measurable fact. They didn't need a body, a confession, or forensic confirmation. They had a feeling, and in the collective psychology of unresolved tragedy, feelings become facts. The community's faith divided into two intertwined dimensions: spiritual justice and earthly punishment. The spiritual aspect was redemptive. Hundreds of comments declared that God took Summer home, and that her soul is free now. They pictured her in heaven, safe, radiant, untouched by further harm. That belief transformed outrage into solace. In that vision, no matter how corrupt the world seemed, divine balance still existed. The guilty could hide from police but not from God. The earthly side of that faith was far harsher. Many demanded retribution in human terms, death penalty for all involved. Hang them high, no mercy for monsters. The contradiction was striking: mercy in heaven, vengeance on earth. Together, they completed the emotional architecture of justice. If the courts wouldn't punish, then belief would. Within this moral framework, the legal silence of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was interpreted not as prudence but as complicity. "They know and do nothing," one commenter wrote. "They're protecting the guilty." Another echoed, "The justice system failed Summer, but God won't." In this cosmology, law enforcement represented the earthly system that hides the truth, while Donna embodied the spiritual system that reveals it. The deeper issue lies in how certainty replaced evidence. Once the audience accepted Donna's narrative as truth, every subsequent event, or lack thereof, served to confirm it. No arrests. That meant the system was corrupt. No body found. That meant the cover-up succeeded. Every gap in the official record was filled with moral inference. This phenomenon is not unique to the Wells case. In criminology, it mirrors what analysts call belief entrenchment, the psychological process through which emotional investment transforms speculation into identity. Believing in Donna became a statement of belonging. Doubting her felt like betrayal, not just to her, but to Summer herself. The comments reveal that many followers equated skepticism with apathy. "If you don't believe Donna, you don't care about children," wrote one user. Another warned, "Mocking her is mocking God's messenger." Thus, disagreement became sin, faith became virtue. In this dynamic, the public no longer demanded proof, they demanded alignment. From a forensic communication standpoint, the transformation of the case into a faith narrative had profound consequences. It kept the story alive, ensuring that Summer Wells was never forgotten, but it also created a self-contained reality where alternative explanations couldn't survive. Within that belief system, there was no room for uncertainty, error, or nuance. The psychic was right, the parents were guilty, and the system was broken. This version of justice served a dual psychological purpose. It restored order to chaos and meaning to suffering. For people powerless to act, believing in Donna's truth was an act of agency, a way to stand on the side of righteousness. It was less about finding a child and more about reaffirming the moral code that the case had shattered. Yet, this form of faith-based conviction also obscures the very justice it seeks. When emotion becomes verdict, the real investigation stagnates. Witnesses grow silent, fearing ridicule. Evidence becomes irrelevant if it doesn't match the communal narrative. The internet, in its hunger for moral clarity, can turn compassion into condemnation, without ever proving anything. In the Wells case, that dynamic has solidified. The community's unwavering faith in Donna has effectively rendered the case unsolvable in public discourse. Any future revelation, even one contradicting her story, would be dismissed as manipulation. When belief becomes the system of record, truth has no entry point. Still, it would be reductive to dismiss this faith as mere delusion. Beneath it lies genuine grief, empathy, and outrage. People wanted accountability, safety for other children, and acknowledgement of systemic neglect. Donna's words offered emotional justice when institutional justice remained silent. The fervor may distort facts, but it also speaks to a universal need to believe that innocence will be avenged, somehow, somewhere. The paradox, then, is that faith both preserved and buried the case. It ensured Summer's name would never fade, but it also locked her story inside a version the world may never escape. Every new lead will now compete with a legend. And so the central question emerges, not about evidence, but about authority. When proof cannot speak, does belief have the right to speak for it? If justice is supposed to weigh facts, what happens when those facts are replaced by conviction, and conviction itself becomes the verdict? The Summer Wells case may not have reached a courtroom, but in the hearts of thousands, the trial has already ended, the verdict delivered, the sentence emotional, and the evidence spiritual. What remains is silence, the kind left behind when faith has spoken louder than truth, and a child's name becomes both a prayer and a warning in a world where justice sometimes forgets the difference between believing and knowing.